She never finished developing the photo. Neighbors heard glass shatter, a single scream, then nothing. When police forced their way into the small bungalow on Birchwood Avenue, the air inside was thick with chemical fumes. The red light in the dark room was still burning. Evelyn Marks, a 31-year-old photographer born and raised in St. Augustine, Florida, lay motionless on the floor. Her camera was shattered beside her. To anyone else, it looked like an accident, a spill, a fall, a tragic mistake. But one photograph still hanging from the drying line told a different story. In the center was Evelyn's reflection. Behind her, blurred and almost invisible, stood the outline of another person. Someone had been in that room with her. For 40 years, no one could say who it was, until new DNA technology finally revealed the truth. The person Evelyn captured in that final frame was the man who lived across the street, the same man who led the search, who spoke at her funeral, and who smiled for the cameras when everyone believed she had simply fallen. This is the story of a woman who caught her own killer on film. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments. And if you believe every secret leaves a trace, hit subscribe, because what you are about to hear will make you look twice at the people next door. The smell hit them first. A sour chemical haze that burned the throat as the first officer stepped into the bungalow. The air inside was thick, heavy, and silent. Flashlights swept across the small living room, past framed photographs, dried palms in a vase, and a half-finished cup of coffee still warm on the table. Then they reached the dark room. Evelyn Marks lay on the floor, her body twisted near the sink, one hand caught in the strap of her broken camera. The red light above her was still glowing, washing the room in a ghostly hue. Trays of developer fluid had spilled across the tiles, and the sharp smell clung to the walls. To most of the officers, it looked like a tragic accident, a fall, a head injury, maybe the fumes. Case closed before it even started. Detective Paul Navarro saw something else. He saw tension frozen in motion. The way the stool had fallen, the way the strap on her wrist was coiled too tightly, as if someone had pulled it. He crouched beside the body, studying the pattern of droplets on the floor. She turned fast, he said quietly. Something scared her. A crime scene technician gathered the film strips from the drying line. Most were blank or overexposed. One was not. It was half-developed, an image of Evelyn standing in front of her own reflection. The photo was distorted. The chemicals had not settled yet. But behind her, faint and blurred, was another outline. A figure, broad shoulders, just out of focus. Navarro stared at it for a long time. "Keep this one separate," he said. "Do not lose it." By afternoon, the coroner's van had taken the body. Reporters were already outside the fence. St. Augustine was a small town where everyone knew everyone. Evelyn was born here, the girl with the camera who photographed beach weddings, school portraits, and the fishermen at sunrise. Losing her felt personal. Navarro spent the rest of the day retracing her final hours. He learned she had been preparing a gallery submission and had been working late most nights. Her best friend, a hairdresser named Clara Jennings, told him Evelyn had been uneasy lately. She said someone kept showing up at her exhibits, just standing there, watching. A man she did not know. She said he made her skin crawl. Clara thought it was harmless attention. People stared at artists all the time. At dusk, Navarro returned to Birchwood Avenue. The palms swayed under orange streetlights. Neighbors stood on porches whispering. One of them stepped forward. "Detective, I am Tom Avery, across the street. I saw her lights on last night." Avery spoke softly, calm and polite. She waved through the window, said she was finishing a new batch of prints. Navarro nodded. "Did you notice anyone else around? Strange cars?" Avery shook his head. "No, sir." It was quiet. Navarro wrote it down, thanked him, and turned to leave. When he glanced back, Avery was still standing there, motionless, watching the house with an unreadable expression. The next morning, the medical examiner ruled the death accidental. Cause of death: chemical inhalation and blunt force trauma from a fall. The newspaper headline read, "Local photographer dies in studio mishap." The town grieved and then moved on. Navarro did not. He requested the print from the evidence lab and had it enlarged under neutral light. The blurred shape behind Evelyn grew sharper. The angle of the shoulders, the distance from her face. Someone had been in that room. Someone close to her. He wrote a single note in his file. Reopen when new technology becomes available. Retest image if possible. Then he sealed the photograph in an envelope and placed it in cold storage. For nearly 40 years that envelope sat untouched in a metal cabinet in the St. Johns County evidence vault. Waiting. The answer to what happened to Evelyn Marks was already there, frozen in silver nitrate, waiting for time and science to catch up. What do you think Evelyn saw in those final seconds? Leave your thoughts in the comments and stay with us as we reopen the case that haunted a town for 4 decades. The funeral took place 3 days later under the wide Florida sky. The sun was sharp that morning, too bright for the occasion, glinting off the white headstones at the small cemetery behind St. Mary's Church. People from all over town came. Former students, local artists, fishermen she had photographed. Even the mayor. Evelyn had been one of their own, born and raised among them, and now her name was carved into stone before she had even turned 32. Detective Paul Navarro stood near the back, hands folded, listening to the soft hum of hymns carried by the wind. The priest spoke of light and art, and how Evelyn had captured beauty others overlooked. Her father, frail and quiet, held her mother's hand. Her best friend Clara placed one of Evelyn's cameras beside the casket, its lens still cracked from the accident. When the service ended, neighbors lined up to offer condolences. One of the first to step forward was Tom Avery. He wore a dark suit that looked too new, his hair neatly combed. A white rose pinned to his lapel. "If there is anything you need," he told the Marks family. "Anything at all, I am right across the street." His voice was calm and gentle, the way people speak when they want to sound safe. Evelyn's mother thanked him through tears. After the crowd left, Navarro stayed behind, watching as Tom helped fold the chairs and gather the flower stands. He moved with quiet confidence, as though he belonged there. When Navarro approached him, Tom smiled politely. "It is good someone is looking into it," he said. Evelyn deserved that. Navarro studied his face for a moment. "You two were close?" "Neighbors mostly," Tom said. "But she was special. You could feel it." That night, while the rest of the town slept, candles flickered in Evelyn's dark room. Her brother Daniel had asked Navarro to let him clean out her things. The detective agreed, on the condition that he would document everything first. Together they boxed her negatives, her cameras, her notebooks. In one of the drawers, Navarro found a small spiral notepad filled with neat handwriting. The last entry was dated 2 days before her death. It read, "He was outside again. I saw him near the fence. I think he is watching me." Navarro read the line twice. He turned the page, but it was blank. He slipped the notepad into an evidence bag and made a note to revisit it later. The next morning, the town paper ran a front-page tribute. Evelyn Marks remembered as the Eye of St. Augustine. The article described her as gentle, artistic, loved by everyone. There was no mention of the investigation or of any doubt about the cause of death. It was easier for people to believe she had simply fallen, that it had been no one's fault. Weeks passed. The headlines faded, the flowers wilted. But Tom Avery did not disappear. He mowed the Marks' lawn every Saturday, brought groceries to Evelyn's parents, fixed the squeaky gate that led to the backyard. Everyone said he was a godsend, a man who cared. Navarro saw something different. He saw a man who needed to stay close. Every time he visited the family, Tom was already there, offering coffee, carrying boxes, smiling too easily. It was small things at first, but Navarro noticed them all. One evening, as he was leaving the Marks' house, he glanced across the street. Tom's curtains were open, the glow of a desk lamp spilling onto the porch. On the wall behind him hung a large framed photograph. It was one of Evelyn's early portraits, taken years before she died. Her eyes stared out of the picture, half smiling, frozen in time. Navarro stood there for a moment, the warm air heavy with the sound of crickets. Then he walked back to his car and made a note in his pocketbook. Keep an eye on Tom Avery. It would be decades before that line in Navarro's handwriting became the thread that finally unraveled the truth. What do you think Tom Avery was hiding behind that smile? Leave your thoughts in the comments and stay with us as we continue the story of Evelyn Marks, the woman whose final photograph refused to stay silent. By the time winter rolled into Street Augustine, Evelyn's name had begun to fade from the headlines. The tourists came back, the markets reopened, and the sound of life drowned out the quiet questions that still lingered in the air. Officially, her case was closed. Cause of death: accidental. The town accepted it because believing otherwise meant admitting that someone among them had done the unthinkable. Detective Paul Navarro could not let it go. He reread the notepad he had found in her darkroom every night before leaving his office. That one sentence stayed with him. He was outside again. I saw him near the fence. It was not paranoia. It was detail. Evelyn had been precise in everything she did. If she wrote it down, it meant it happened. He requested surveillance logs, canvassed the neighborhood again, and interviewed everyone who had seen her in the last week of her life. Each story was the same. Evelyn kept to herself, polite, focused on her photography. No enemies, no debts, no drama. Everyone said the same phrase in almost identical tones. She was kind to everyone. Navarro began to hate those words. Kindness did not protect people. It made them easy targets. Across the street, Tom Avery's life seemed to slip neatly into the space Evelyn had left behind. He started visiting her parents regularly, bringing groceries, trimming the hedges, checking on the mail. When Evelyn's brother Daniel decided to move back to Jacksonville, Tom offered to look after the house until they figured out what to do with it. No one questioned his generosity. In a small Florida town, good manners often disguised obsession. Navarro drove past the house one night in late December. The street was quiet, the palms rustling in the ocean wind. Through the window he saw Tom sitting alone at Evelyn's kitchen table. In front of him was a stack of photographs, her photographs. He was turning them slowly, one by one, as if memorizing them. Navarro sat there for several minutes, engine off, lights out, just watching. He knew he had no grounds for a warrant. The case was technically closed. But he also knew what obsession looked like. He had seen it before, just never this close to home. He filed an informal note in his personal logbook. Possible fixation by neighbor. Maintain contact with family. That line was the last official record tied to the case for almost 40 years. Time moved forward, but Evelyn's story remained suspended. Her parents sold the house and moved north. Tom Avery stayed in town. He joined the local historical society, volunteered at the church, became the man people called when they needed help. By the mid-90s, he was a fixture in community events. a familiar and trusted face in every photograph of neighborhood fundraisers. When Navarro retired in 1999, he left behind 30 years of service and one unresolved question. He boxed up his files and placed Evelyn's folder on top. The envelope with her final photograph was still sealed. On its surface, in faded ink, were the words he had written long ago. "Reopen when new technology becomes available." He carried the box home and stored it in his attic, beside his old badges and commendations. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would take it down and stare at the photograph again. The blurred figure behind Evelyn never seemed to change, yet something about it always shifted depending on the light. Sometimes it looked like a man. Sometimes it looked like something less human, something made of guilt and waiting. By the time Navarro passed away in 2016, no one in the department remembered Evelyn's case. Her photograph sat forgotten in an archive, locked in a cabinet with other cold cases from a forgotten era. But the evidence did not disappear. It waited, and so did the truth. What would you have seen in that photo if it were you? Leave your thoughts in the comments and stay with us as the story of Evelyn Marks continues, because some secrets never die. The evidence vault beneath the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office smelled of dust, paper, and time. Rows of metal shelves stretched into the darkness, stacked with forgotten stories. Some of those boxes would never be opened again. Others waited for a reason. In February 2024, that reason finally came. Detective Sophia Torres had transferred from Miami to lead the new Cold Case Task Force, a small unit dedicated to applying modern DNA technology to old evidence. On her second week, she found a stack of brown boxes labeled with faded black ink. She pulled one from the bottom shelf. The handwriting on its spine caught her attention. E. Marks, 1984. Inside was a single evidence envelope, a few Polaroids, and a brief handwritten note signed by a name she barely recognized. Detective Paul Navarro. The note read, "Reopen when new technology becomes available." Sophia set the note aside and lifted the envelope carefully. Inside was a photograph sealed between two sheets of glass. It was cloudy from time and age, the chemicals baked into the paper. Under bright lab light, the image came alive. Evelyn stood in her darkroom, the faint red glow surrounding her like smoke. Behind her reflection was a blurred figure. It felt close, almost breathing against the lens. Sophia felt the hair on her arms rise. She had seen thousands of crime scene photos, but this one felt different. It was not just documentation, it was witness. She requested the original negatives and film canisters stored in the same archive. 2 days later, the lab team began the process of digital restoration. The new scanners picked up details invisible to the human eye: the angle of the blur, the edge of a shirt collar, the suggestion of a jawline. It was enough to extract microscopic traces of skin cells embedded in the film's emulsion. When the DNA results came back 3 weeks later, they found a match. Not a direct one, but a familial match, a genetic link to a man recently arrested for a traffic violation in Jacksonville. The system flagged him as Mark Avery, age 28. His genetic profile shared a paternal connection to someone else. Sophia froze at the name. Avery. She went back to the original file. The neighbor's name was Tom Avery. She leaned back in her chair, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the silence. 40 years apart, but the bloodline didn't lie. The DNA found on Evelyn's film belonged to someone directly related to the man who had lived across the street. The next morning, Sophia drove to Street Augustine. The old neighborhood looked almost the same: palm-lined streets, pastel bungalows, and the smell of salt drifting from the ocean. She parked across from Evelyn's former home, now painted blue with white shutters. A family with young children lived there. Across the street stood the Avery house. The mailbox still carried the same last name. She knocked. A woman in her 60s opened the door, cautious but kind. "You must be here about Tom," she said before Sophia could speak. "He passed away 6 years ago. Stroke." Sophia nodded slowly. "I'm sorry for your loss. I'm following up on an old case. Evelyn Marks." The woman's expression changed. A flicker of something recognition, fear, guilt crossed her face. "You're still looking into that?" "Yes," Sophia said. "We've found new evidence." The woman hesitated, then stepped aside. "You'd better come in." Inside, the house was neat but strangely sterile. Family photographs lined the mantel, but one frame had been turned face down. Sophia glanced toward it, but said nothing. "I always wondered when someone would come," the widow whispered. "He used to talk about her sometimes, said he wished he could have helped her more." Sophia asked if Tom had kept any of his old belongings. The widow nodded toward the attic. "There's a box. I never opened it. It didn't feel right." 2 hours later, that box sat on the evidence table back at the sheriff's office. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs Evelyn had taken, and one that froze everyone in the room. It was a candid shot, taken by Evelyn herself, showing Tom Avery smiling in her doorway, holding a mug of coffee. The timestamp matched the night before she died. For the first time in 40 years, the story began to shift. Evelyn Marks had not died alone. The man in the photograph she left behind had finally been given a name. What do you think Detective Torres will find in that attic box? Leave your thoughts in the comments and stay with us, because the truth about Evelyn's final night is about to come into focus. Detective Sophia Torres sat alone in the evidence room, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines. The box from the Avery attic lay open on the table in front of her. Inside was a stack of photographs wrapped neatly in twine, a few rolls of undeveloped film, and a small leather-bound notebook. She slipped on gloves and untied the twine. The first few photos were innocent. Landscapes, church events, children playing in the street. Then the tone shifted. The next photographs were all of Evelyn Marks, each taken from a distance. Some through windows, some from the sidewalk near her fence, others from inside the gallery where she had displayed her work. All from an angle that suggested the subject had no idea she was being watched. Sophia leaned forward, her heartbeat slowing into that familiar rhythm of recognition. She had seen Stalker's archives before. The progression was always the same. Distant shots first, followed by closer frames, until obsession blurred the line between fascination and control. She opened the notebook next. The handwriting was firm, deliberate. The first entry read, "She is light. Everyone else just pretends." Another said, "She keeps her curtains open when she works. It feels like she wants to be seen." The last entry was dated October 11th, 1984. "Tomorrow she will see me differently." Sophia closed the notebook slowly. The words were not the ramblings of a man who admired someone. They were the notes of someone who believed ownership was love. She called the state lab and requested a rush on the undeveloped film rolls. 2 days later, the images came back digitized. Most showed Evelyn inside her darkroom, taken through the side window of her house. In the final roll, there was one photo unlike the others. It was blurry, tilted, as if the camera had been dropped mid-shot. The frame showed the corner of Evelyn's red-lit darkroom, and in the lower edge of the photo, a woman's hand reaching up. It was Evelyn's. The timestamp confirmed it was taken the night she died. Sophia exhaled, staring at the monitor. "He was inside the house," she whispered. She met with the state attorney the following morning. The case could not lead to prosecution since Tom Avery was deceased, but the evidence was overwhelming. Still, Sophia wanted more than closure. She wanted truth. She began tracking people who had known Tom back in the 80s. His co-workers, neighbors, church acquaintances. Most described him the same way. Polite, reliable, quiet. One woman, Margaret Hill, now in her 70s, remembered him differently. He had a way of standing too close, she said during the interview. Always looking at people like he was waiting for something. Back then we thought he was just shy. Margaret paused, her eyes wet. When Evelyn went missing, he was the first one to knock on my door, asking if I had seen her. He even helped the police go through her trash. I thought he was kind. Sophia asked if Tom had ever spoken about Evelyn after her death. Margaret nodded. All the time. Said she was misunderstood. Said she made people uncomfortable because she was too open. It sounded strange, but no one wanted to question a man who was grieving. Sophia's next stop was the local church, where Avery had volunteered for years. In a storage room behind the sanctuary, she found old community bulletins and newsletters. One of them, printed months after Evelyn's death, included a black-and-white photo from the memorial service. In the image, Tom Avery stood behind the Marks family, one hand on Evelyn's mother's shoulder. His expression was solemn, but his eyes were fixed on the coffin. Sophia stared at the photograph for a long time. He wanted to stay close, she murmured. He didn't just kill her. He replaced her. That night, she sat in her office long after everyone else had gone home. On her desk lay the restored photograph Evelyn had taken the night she died. Under magnification, the blurred figure was unmistakable. The jawline matched the candid image from the attic. The shirt collar was the same. Even the faint scar near the temple was visible in both photos. It was Tom Avery. Sophia leaned back in her chair. The air in the room felt heavy. Somewhere between admiration and control, between neighbor and predator, he had crossed a line so quietly that no one noticed until it was too late. She typed her final note for the report. Case closed. Cause of death, homicide, perpetrator, Thomas Avery. Evidence confirms contact and presence at scene. Motive, fixation, control, and perceived rejection. She closed the file but did not feel relief. Evelyn's story was no longer a mystery, but it left behind a question that would echo long after the ink dried. How many other faces had Tom Avery photographed when no one was looking? What do you think drives someone to destroy what they claim to love? Leave your thoughts in the comments and stay with us, because in the next chapter we uncover how a community realized they had trusted a man who watched from the shadows all along. The news broke quietly at first. A short press release from the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office confirmed that the death of Evelyn Marks in 1984 had been reclassified as a homicide. The statement was factual, sterile, almost clinical. It listed the findings, the DNA link, and the name of the suspect. Thomas Avery, deceased. But small towns have long memories. Within hours, the story spread through St. Augustine like a tide pulling at the edges of old wounds. People who had known Evelyn called one another in disbelief. Some refused to accept it. Others said they had always felt something off about Tom, but never wanted to be the one to say it. By sunset, the front porch lights of Birchwood Avenue burned brighter than usual. Neighbors stood outside with folded arms, staring at the Avery house as if it might speak. The new owners kept their curtains closed. They had moved in just a year earlier and had no idea of the history that lived in the walls. Detective Sophia Torres returned to St. Augustine that evening. Her car rolled slowly down the narrow street, past homes where laughter and suspicion now mingled uneasily. She parked in front of Evelyn's old house. The front steps had been replaced, the fence freshly painted, but the structure itself was unchanged. For a moment, she imagined Evelyn standing at the window with her camera, waiting for the perfect light. At the end of the block, she saw reporters setting up cameras, local news vans, cables, microphones, bright lights cutting through the humid air. A man from Channel 5 called out, "Detective, is it true the killer helped search for her body?" She did not stop walking. "It is true," she said quietly, "and he fooled all of you." The next morning, the town gathered at St. Mary's Church for an impromptu memorial. It had been 40 years since Evelyn's funeral. This time, there was no casket, only photographs of her work displayed along the pews. Fishermen from the old marina came wearing their Sunday shirts. Former students brought their children. Her best friend, Clara Jennings, stood near the altar clutching one of Evelyn's cameras. When the pastor asked if anyone wanted to speak, Clara stepped forward. "For years we told ourselves it was an accident," she said, "because that was easier. Easier than admitting that someone we trusted was capable of something like this." Tom was at every fundraiser, every search, every prayer vigil. He mowed lawns, brought food, comforted families. And while we all called him a good man, Evelyn's truth was buried in his backyard. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. If we had listened to her, if we had believed her fear instead of dismissing it as nerves, maybe she'd still be here. The church was silent. Only the sound of the ceiling fan and muffled sobs filled the space. After the service, people lingered outside in clusters. Some carried guilt, others anger. A man who had once coached Tom in church softball told a reporter, "He fooled us all. He looked like every other man trying to do right by his neighbors. I guess monsters don't always look like monsters." Sophia watched from a distance. She had seen communities react to truth before. First disbelief, then outrage, then shame. The hardest part was always the realization that the signs had been there all along. Evelyn had written that she was being watched. People had seen Tom's car parked outside her home late at night. They had noticed his sudden generosity after her death. They just chose not to connect the dots. Back at the station, Sophia opened her final report. She added an addendum before closing the case. Community denial contributed to the longevity of the case. Subject exploited trust and faith to mask predatory behavior. She read the sentence twice, then saved it to the digital archive. Outside, the Florida sky began to darken with an approaching storm. Rain fell in sudden heavy drops, washing the streets of Birchwood clean. The Avery mailbox rattled in the wind, its nameplate faded and peeling. Across the road, in the window of Evelyn's old house, the new owner had placed one of her photographs. It showed the ocean at sunrise, calm and endless. Sophia stood there a moment longer, rain soaking her hair. "She finally got her light back," she whispered. For the people of St. Augustine, the case of Evelyn Marks became a mirror, a story told to remind them that evil rarely arrives as a stranger. It arrives with a smile, an open hand, and an offer to help. What would you have done if you were one of those neighbors? Would you have believed her? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and stay with us as we follow how the truth about Evelyn Marks reshaped an entire town. The phone call came early in the morning. Evelyn's brother Daniel Marks was drinking coffee on his porch in Jacksonville when the voice on the line said the words he had stopped expecting to hear. "Mr. Marks, this is Detective Sophia Torres from St. Johns County. We've closed your sister's case. It was homicide. We know who did it." For a few seconds he couldn't speak. The cicadas outside droned loud enough to fill the silence. "You're sure?" he finally asked. "We are," Sophia replied. "It was Tom Avery." Daniel stared into his coffee as if the answer might rise from the surface. "He used to bring food to my parents after she died," he said softly. "He sat at our table. He prayed with us." Sophia didn't respond. There were no words that could make sense of that kind of betrayal. By noon, the Marks family had gathered in Street Augustine. Evelyn's parents were gone now, both buried in the same cemetery where their daughter rested. But Daniel brought his wife and teenage daughter, who had grown up hearing fragments of Evelyn's story. They met Sophia at the station, where she laid out the photographs, the notebook, and the DNA report. The room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. Daniel picked up the notebook with gloved hands. His eyes moved over the words. "She is light. Tomorrow she will see me differently." He shut the cover slowly. "He wrote this about her?" "Yes," Sophia said. "We found it in his attic, along with these." She gestured toward the photos. Evelyn through windows. Evelyn in her yard. Evelyn smiling at her camera, unaware she was being hunted. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "My mother always said she felt like he stayed too close. After the funeral, she told me it made her skin crawl when he came by, but she thought she was just grieving." Sophia nodded. He built his life around the idea that people would never question kindness. They spent 2 hours going through every item, every timestamp, every detail. When it was done, Daniel folded his hands and looked at Sophia. "What happens now?" "We're going to make it public," she said. "Not for sensationalism, but because your sister's story can teach others. We're preparing a case study for law enforcement training. We want them to see what predatory fixation looks like, how charm and trust can hide it." He nodded slowly. "That's what she'd want, for it to mean something." Oh. 2 months later, the sheriff's office held a press conference. Cameras lined the steps, reporters pressed forward, the Florida sun turning everything white and hot. Sophia stood at the podium, flanked by Daniel and his family. Behind them was a large easel with a framed photograph of Evelyn, her favorite self-portrait, taken at the beach at sunrise. "Today," Sophia said, "we close a case that should have been solved 40 years ago." Evelyn Marks was not a victim of accident. She was a victim of obsession. Her story is a reminder that evil often hides in plain sight. It does not always come with warning. Sometimes it comes with help. Reporters fired questions, but Sophia kept her answers simple. Facts only, no speculation, no drama. The truth was heavy enough on its own. Afterward, Daniel stood at the memorial garden that had been built near Evelyn's old home. He placed a single shell on the stone engraved with her name. "She always loved the ocean," he said to his daughter. "Said it never lies." His daughter nodded, her eyes bright. "She caught him," she whispered. Even if it took 40 years, she caught him. That night, Sophia returned to her office. The photographs had been digitized and sealed again. She placed the original box in a glass case labeled "Closed Resolved by DNA." The room lights dimmed as she stepped back. For the first time since opening the file, she felt stillness instead of tension, the kind of quiet that comes when the past finally releases its hold. Evelyn's face looked back from the enlarged print on her wall, calm and steady. Outside, rain began to fall across Street Augustine, gentle and persistent. The palm trees swayed, the streets glistened, and the house on Birchwood Avenue stood dark and silent once more. Somewhere, if memory could breathe, Evelyn Marks had the last word. She had taken one photograph that refused to stay buried, one final image that demanded to be seen, and in the end, it was light that told her story. If you were her family, would you want to see those photographs, or let them stay locked away? Tell us in the comments. and stay with us as we explore what happens when justice finally meets time. 2 weeks after the press conference, the story of Evelyn Marks left the borders of Street Augustine. What had begun as a quiet local update became a national headline. Major outlets ran it under variations of the same phrase: Florida cold case solved after 40 years. The photo of Evelyn's final frame appeared everywhere. The blurred outline behind her, the quiet defiance in her eyes, the tragic poetry of a woman who had unknowingly photographed her own killer. Morning talk shows debated it. Podcasts dissected every detail. Hashtags began trending. People were drawn not only to the horror, but to the haunting symbolism of the case, a woman whose art captured the truth her words never could. Detective Sofia Torres did not expect the reaction. One night, she came home to find her phone flooded with messages from law enforcement across the country. Investigators from other states wanted to know how she had pulled DNA from a decades-old photograph. One message read, "We've got a similar case. Do you think your process could work here?" Within a month, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement invited her to present the case at a national conference on forensic innovation. The hall was filled with detectives, scientists, and analysts, some who had spent entire careers chasing ghosts that never turned solid. Sofia stood behind the podium, the same photograph projected on the screen behind her. "This image was taken by the victim," she began. "The chemicals in the film preserved traces of the person who stood behind her. For 40 years, we had the truth in our hands. We just didn't have the tools to read it. Is aligned." She explained the process. Advanced emulsion scraping, genomic sequencing, cross-reference through the genealogical database. The audience listened in complete silence. When she finished, no one applauded at first. Then, slowly, the room began to fill with quiet clapping that grew into something louder. Not celebration, but recognition. Afterward, an older detective approached her. "I worked with Paul Navarro," he said. "Back then, he told me that picture was wrong. Everyone thought he was seeing ghosts. Guess he wasn't." Sofia smiled. He left a note on the file, said to reopen it when the technology caught up. The man nodded. "He'd be proud you did." Within months, the Evelyn Protocol became an official term among cold case units, a forensic process that combined deep restoration of analog evidence with modern DNA sequencing. Her story became part of training manuals, documentaries, even a short segment on national television titled "The Photograph That Solved Its Own Murder." But it wasn't the fame that mattered to Sofia. It was the ripple effect. Across the country, other departments began reopening their archives. In Arizona, a case from 1979 found new leads. In Maine, a photograph from 1982 revealed touch DNA that matched a long-forgotten suspect. Evelyn's legacy had quietly rewritten the way investigators looked at evidence. One evening, Sofia sat on her porch overlooking the Atlantic, the wind carrying salt through the humid air. Her laptop buzzed with notifications, but she ignored them. She was reading an email from Daniel Marks. He thanked her for keeping his sister's story alive, for turning pain into purpose. "You didn't just solve a case," he wrote. "You gave her a voice." Sofia closed the laptop and looked out at the dark horizon. "No," she whispered. She gave it to herself. Across the ocean of screens and headlines, Evelyn's image continued to move, reposted, shared, studied. People said her eyes seemed to look right at you, as if she were asking a question no one could ignore. Who is watching you when you aren't looking back? That was the power of the story. It wasn't just about death or justice. It was about awareness. About every woman who had ever felt unsafe but stayed quiet because she didn't want to sound paranoid. Evelyn's story made people listen again. By the end of the year, the state of Florida passed new funding for unsolved violent crimes. The grant was named the Marks Initiative, dedicated to improving forensic access for small counties. In death, Evelyn had changed more than her own story. She had changed the system that once failed her. The light she chased with her camera now burned inside every investigator who refused to let time bury the truth. If one photograph could change how the world sees justice, what secrets might still be hidden inside all the others waiting on dusty shelves? Tell us in the comments, and stay with us as we reach the final chapters of Evelyn's story, when the past, at last, finds peace. It began with a letter. A plain white envelope with no return address arrived at the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office one humid morning in August. Inside was a single photograph, sun-faded and curled at the corners. It showed a young woman standing on a dock along the Intracoastal Waterway, dressed in a white sundress with a camera around her neck. Detective Sophia Torres recognized the composition immediately. The balance of light, the frame, the intimacy of the lens. It was the unmistakable eye of Evelyn Marks. But Evelyn was not behind the camera this time. She was in the picture. On the back of the photograph, someone had written 5 words in shaky handwriting. He took more than one. Sophia felt her stomach tighten. The paper was old but not fragile. The ink had not fully faded. She sent it to the lab for analysis. 2 days later, the results came in. The note was written on church stationery from a batch discontinued in 1986. No fingerprints, no trace DNA, but one thing stood out. The surface of the photograph showed tiny handling marks that matched Tom Avery's known fingerprint pattern from his archived possessions. That same week, Sophia met with a local historian who specialized in unsolved disappearances from the 80s. He brought a list of missing women from the coastal counties surrounding St. Augustine. One name immediately caught her eye: Lydia Cross, age 26, missing since 1983. Lydia had been part of a small church photography group, the same group where Tom Avery volunteered. Sophia requested Lydia's old file. The similarities were chilling. Both women were creative, quiet, and kind. Both had been part of the same community circles, and both had vanished within a year of one another. The next morning, Sophia drove north to Crescent Beach. The town looked almost untouched by time. Pastel houses with screened porches and the smell of salt in the air. She found Lydia's younger sister, Janet, still living in their childhood home. When Sophia showed her the photograph, Janet's face went pale. "That's her," she whispered. "That's Lydia. But we've never seen this picture before." "Do you remember Tom Avery?" Sophia asked. Janet nodded. "He went to our church, helped with the photo group. He even helped my father build the booth for the fair that summer." She paused. "I thought he moved away after that other girl died." "The one from St. Augustine." Sophia looked down at her notes. "He never left." Janet's voice trembled. "He came to our house once after Lydia disappeared, brought food, told my mother he wished he could have done more to protect her." Sophia pressed her lips together. "He wanted to be near the pain. That is how people like him work." Back at the office, she cross-referenced Avery's work history, travel routes, and church rosters. The overlap was undeniable. He had been in Crescent Beach during Lydia's disappearance. He had volunteered at the same events and helped with the search. Sophia requested an excavation permit for the area near the old dock in the photograph. After 3 days of scanning with ground-penetrating radar, the team detected a patch of disturbed soil. Beneath it, they found fragments of human bone, a corroded tripod, and a silver bracelet engraved with the initials L.C. The DNA results confirmed it. Lydia Cross had finally been found. The town of Crescent Beach reacted with shock and grief. For decades, people had told themselves she ran away or drowned. The truth was worse. She had been erased by someone who stood beside them at Sunday service. Sophia returned to the shoreline, where the dock once stood. The tide was rising, soft waves lapping at the edges of the excavation site. She looked out over the water and whispered, "You were not his first, and you were not forgotten." The photograph that arrived without a name had broken the silence again. Someone had known. Someone had carried that secret for 40 years. As Sophia turned the photo over in her hands, the words on the back seemed to breathe in the salt air. He took more than one. It was not just a warning. It was confession, grief, and truth all at once. She folded the photo gently and slipped it back into its envelope. Somewhere out there, the person who sent it was still alive. And whoever they were, they had just reopened the darkness one final time. What do you think? Who sent the letter? Someone from the church, a survivor, or a conscience that waited too long? Tell us in the comments and stay with us as Sophia follows the trail of that handwriting into the past, where another secret still waits to surface. The handwriting was the key. Detective Sophia Torres had seen thousands of letters in her career. Threats, confessions, pleas for attention. But this one was different. Each curve of the words he took more than one carried tension, like someone writing with a trembling hand. The strokes were careful, deliberate, and emotional. It felt like guilt. She sent high-resolution scans to a forensic document examiner in Tallahassee. 2 weeks later, the report arrived. The handwriting showed signs of aging and deterioration, but it also displayed one telltale pattern: tremors consistent with early Parkinson's disease. The writer was still alive, likely in their late 70s. Sophia started looking at the old church rosters from the early 80s. Most of the names meant nothing to her until she reached the bottom of the list. Margaret Hill. Sophia recognized the name instantly. Margaret had been one of the first neighbors to find Evelyn's body in 1984. She had spoken to investigators. She had described Tom Avery as kind and dependable. Back then, she had seemed sincere. Sophia checked the county records. Margaret was now 81 and living in a retirement home on the outskirts of town. That afternoon, Sophia drove there through heavy rain, windshield wipers beating like a pulse. The retirement home sat behind a line of oaks, quiet and beige. When Sophia entered, the nurse nodded toward a sunroom overlooking a pond. Margaret was sitting there in a floral dress, her hands folded over a blanket. She looked smaller than Sophia remembered from the photographs, but her eyes were alert. Sophia introduced herself, then laid the envelope on the table. Margaret looked at it without touching it. "I was hoping you'd come," she said softly. "You wrote it," Sophia said. "It wasn't a question." Margaret nodded. "I couldn't keep it anymore." Sophia sat down across from her. "How long have you known?" Margaret stared at the pond outside. "Since before Evelyn died." She spoke slowly, each word chosen with care. In the early 80s, she had volunteered at Street Mary's Church, where Tom Avery led a small outreach group for local artists. He was charming, intelligent, and deeply persuasive. He often visited her home, claiming he needed help with donations or planning events. For a while, she believed his kindness was genuine. Then it shifted. He liked control, she said quietly. He would test how much power he had over people. Small things first. Asking me to keep secrets. Asking me to lie for him. Sophia leaned forward. Lie about what? Margaret's eyes met hers. About where he went the night Lydia Cross disappeared. He told me to say we were together at church inventory. I did it because I was afraid of him. There was something in his eyes that made me cold inside. She paused to take a breath. When Evelyn died, I knew. He showed up at my door before the police even arrived. Said I should tell them she'd been feeling dizzy lately. I wanted to tell the truth, but everyone loved him. No one would have believed me. Why right now? Sophia asked. Margaret looked down at her trembling hands. Because I saw her photograph on the news again. That poor girl. I thought I could live with the silence, but it keeps me up at night. I can still see his car parked under her window. Sophia let the silence settle between them. The sound of rain against the glass filled the room. Margaret wiped her eyes. He once told me that women like Evelyn made him feel invisible. He wanted to be the reason people looked at her. I didn't understand what that meant until it was too late. Sophia reached across the table and placed a recorder in front of her. Do you want to make an official statement? Margaret hesitated, then nodded. Yes. I want to end it. The interview lasted 2 hours. By the end, Margaret was shaking from exhaustion, but her voice never faltered. Her confession filled the missing pieces Navarro had once suspected. The false alibis, the pattern of manipulation, the way Tom had used his role in the church to hide behind goodness. When Sophia left, the rain had stopped. The air smelled like wet earth and salt. She stood in the parking lot, staring at the gray sky, feeling both relief and sorrow. The truth was out, but it came 40 years too late for Evelyn and Lydia. That night, she filed Margaret's statement under a new section in the Cold Case Archive. The folder was labeled Witness Testimony Hill, Margaret 2024. Then she sat back and whispered to herself, even the ones who stay silent leave fingerprints. The letter that started it all was sealed in plastic and added to the exhibit case beside Evelyn's photograph. 2 stories, 1 thread of truth. What do you think Margaret lived with all those years? Guilt, fear, or both? Leave your thoughts in the comments and stay with us as we reach the final chapter, where Detective Sophia Torres closes the last door on the case that haunted Street Augustine for half a century. The exhibition opened on a warm evening in May. The old courthouse in downtown Street Augustine had been transformed into a gallery for one night only. Soft light spilled across the marble floors, reflecting off the framed photographs that lined the walls. Every image had been taken by Evelyn Marks. Every print restored, cleaned, and displayed with her name printed in gold beneath the frame. Detective Sophia Torres stood near the entrance, watching the crowd drift through. There were former officers, reporters, students, and quiet strangers who had followed the story online. In one corner, a small display case held the objects that had survived 4 decades of silence. Evelyn's cracked camera, the final photograph, Lydia Cross's bracelet, and the letter that began it all. A plaque beside them read, "Truth, even when buried, learns to breathe again." Daniel Marks stood by the exhibit of his sister's self-portrait. He was older now, his hair gray, but his eyes still carried the calm that Evelyn once had. His daughter held his hand. "She would have loved this," he said. "All this light," Sophia smiled. "She created it. We just brought it back." The mayor gave a short speech about justice and perseverance. When the lights dimmed, a projector illuminated the wall with Evelyn's final photograph, the same image that had once haunted the evidence vault. The audience went completely still. For the first time, people looked at the picture not as a crime scene but as a message. A woman's instinct, her courage, her proof. After the presentation, Sophia stepped outside for air. The night was warm, the sound of the ocean distant but steady. Across the street, the palm trees swayed under the yellow streetlights. For a moment, she could almost imagine Evelyn there, camera in hand, smiling at the way her story had finally come full circle. Margaret Hill's recorded statement had been archived in the public record a month earlier. She passed away quietly, not long after giving it. The nurses said she slept peacefully, as if something heavy had finally lifted. Sophia hoped that was true. A gentle voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Detective Torres?" It was a young woman, no more than 20. "I wanted to thank you. My aunt was one of the women in that photography group. She always said Evelyn changed how she saw the world. I think you did too." Sophia nodded. "Then maybe it was worth it." As the crowd thinned, Daniel approached her again. "What happens now?" She looked back at the courthouse where Evelyn's photographs glowed behind the glass. Now her story belongs to everyone, and hopefully it keeps another woman safe. Later that night, Sophia returned to her office. The archive lights were dim. She walked past the shelves of cold cases, each box marked by names, dates, and towns. Some would never be solved. But somewhere among them, she knew, there were other truths waiting for their light. She stopped at the glass display where Evelyn's file rested. The photograph still glimmered under the soft overhead bulb. The faint outline of Tom Avery behind her was almost invisible now, swallowed by the light she had captured. Sophia whispered, "You got him, Evelyn. You really did." Outside, dawn began to break. The first light touched the horizon, spreading over the town that had carried her name for 40 years. For the first time, Street, Augustine felt quiet in a good way, not empty, but at peace. In the end, it wasn't the police or the science or even the detective who solved the case. It was a woman who refused to disappear, who left proof in the only language she ever needed, light and truth. And so the photograph that once revealed a killer became something else entirely, a reminder that darkness never wins, where light insists on being seen. If this story reached you, remember her name, Evelyn Marks. She saw what others refused to see, and she made the world look closer. Where are you watching from tonight? Tell us in the comments, and subscribe for more true stories that refuse to stay buried. Because every secret, no matter how long it hides, always finds the light. This was the story of Evelyn Marks, the Florida photographer who captured her own killer on film and whose final photograph changed the way the world looks at truth. 40 years of silence ended because one woman refused to disappear, and one detective chose to listen. In the end, it was not evidence that solved her case, but light the kind Evelyn spent her life chasing. Thank you for watching. If this story stayed with you, share it, and remember, every image, every secret, and every unanswered question is only waiting for someone brave enough to look closer.